Welcome, everyone. It's your host, Danny Dhaiphong, for another afternoon live stream. It is great to be with you. Be sure you hit the like button before we get started here. As you come on, that helps boost this stream in YouTube's algorithm. So today we have a breaking story developing, which is a looming ceasefire in Gaza. In the last several days, we've seen intense pressure on Israel from all sides. We have fierce fighting by the resistance in Gaza in the area of Beit Hanun, incredible ambush that killed over 10 Israeli soldiers and injured many, many more. Then you also have Yemen in the last 12 hours alone, sending hypersonic missiles into Israel, hitting Tel Aviv, causing panic in Ben Gurion Airport and other areas from central, northern, what is called Israel, the occupied territory, Palestine, and so much more. Donald Trump also being reportedly pressuring this ceasefire that is now underway. So things are looking very rocky for Israel at the moment. And we have a very special guest to discuss this. I always want to apologize. Low-key and Ghadi Francis were scheduled, but they had personal circumstances they needed to attend to. But no worries, because we have the great Laith Marouf. He is the editor of Palestine TV. You can find that in the video description. Do support that work. Laith, thank you for coming here from Lebanon.
Good to be with you, Danny. Thank you for the invitation.
Of course, of course. So, Laith, I wanted to first talk to you about this ceasefire, but I didn't want to necessarily just talk about the details of it, although they are important. The reports are that there's going to be, I believe, upwards of 30 plus prisoners of war that the resistance in Palestine had taken after October 7th released in exchange for about 1,000 Palestinian prisoners being released. But I wanted to talk to you about the role of the resistance here overall in pressuring this, because after the fall of Syria, there was a lot of, I think, ill feelings, a low mood. Israel was on the march and dominating, but report after report came out after the fall of Syria of Israel's exhausted army. And then the resistance, despite having Syria as no longer possibly a hub for transporting weapons, started to go on the offensive with numerous ambushes, including the most recent one, which took about 10 Israeli soldiers. You also have Yemen firing hypersonics in the last 12 hours, 3. And I think you told me in the last hour, another one. So talk about the pressure here. Everyone is talking about Donald Trump being the one who pressured this, but what are the conditions that have led to the possibility of a ceasefire in Gaza as we move into Trump 2.0?
I think we have to look at the declared goals of the Zionists in all of these war fronts. So the declared goal in Gaza was the destruction of Hamas and its military wing. That didn't happen. Their goal for Lebanon was the destruction of Hezbollah's capabilities. That didn't happen. And their goals for Syria was the stopping of transfer of weapons. And I would say that didn't happen, because in reality right now, Syria is a free-for-all, and anyone can cross the border without any checkpoints or anything from Lebanon into Syria. There is weapons markets everywhere in the towns and cities across the border from Lebanon, where you can buy weapons by the kilo right now. And that includes anything from a tank to the Kalashnikovs and everything in between, ATGMs, mortars, whatever you want to. And I'm not being hyperbolic when I'm saying you can buy them by the kilo. It's not even what the brand or the sophistication of the weapon is that's determining the prices. You can buy a Kalashnikov for $60, $70. And you can buy a tank for a couple of $1,000s. This is how cheap it is right now, and everybody's bringing the weapons into Lebanon. So the stockpiles of the Syrian military that were looted by the Wahhabi death squads, the bandits that work for the CIA, the Turkey, and so on, are right now out in the black market and flooding Lebanon. So all of those goals that the Israelis put for themselves have not been achieved. Now, in terms of pressure on the Zionists by Trump, I think this is all a ruse, a propaganda ploy. We know that basically Netanyahu is accepting right now the exact same deal that Biden put forward. So Netanyahu had promised Trump to make the ceasefire coincide with his arrival as the new emperor, and that's what's happening. And this media coverage that is claiming that Netanyahu got pressured or that Trump's envoy was rude to the Israelis and threatening, those are all propaganda ploys to give Trump what he wants, which is this idea that he's a strong emperor, that he can bully the vassals and colonial holdings of the United States into doing whatever he wants to, unlike that sissy Biden, basically. But in reality, this has all been designed prior to hand.
Yeah, and I think negating the role of the axis of resistance, which had been declared dead, is a huge mistake. Even the Wall Street Journal, just days before the ceasefire talks gained momentum, was talking about how Hamas was rebuilding, how Mohammed Sinwar was building up a even fiercer fighting force, maybe than had been predicted after the assassination, the murder of Yahya Sinwar, and of course the the fall of Syria. So talk about this, because there's reports even in Israeli media saying that Hamas and the resistance now is likely building up a force of 10, 20,000 more fighters as we speak. And this is even to get to those other forces, for example, Hezbollah, which has had some time during this so-called ceasefire in Lebanon to recover, and has vowed that it will also fight if it has to, if the ceasefire doesn't take hold in Gaza. And of course, we can't trust the Israeli regime. Your thoughts?
Yeah, so definitely now inside Gaza, any Palestinian that was, let's say, pacifist before the genocide and or critical of Hamas and Islamic Jihad or any of the parties that carry arms in resistance, having lived senseless genocide and deliberate targeting of civilians and civilian infrastructure, that radicalizes anybody. And we've seen many social media posts by people saying exactly that. Hey, I was like for nonviolent resistance before, but seeing my family being killed, anyone that gives me a weapon, I'll carry it right now against the Israeli. That's the common, I think, feelings within the population in Gaza. And that is making it very easy for the resistance groups to recruit new members. And in fact, they probably have too many applications for people to join in comparison to, let's say, how fast they can absorb them and or how many personal weapons that they can hand over to these new fighters. And the Israelis are facing a different kind of fighters right now. Those who were trained before the genocide and the motivations that they had to fight the Israelis are different than the motivation of those who are survivors of this genocide and are choosing to carry arms, which have a much higher will to fight and to try to avenge their lost ones and their life that was lost under these conditions. So I think the strength of the fighters is now even more than it was before. And we see that playing out in these ambushes inside, the north parts of Gaza that are, historic, heroic actions that we see the videos of are unbelievable, how these ambushes are being conducted. And, when we're talking about the north of Gaza, this is like an area that has been occupied for months now, ethnically cleansed completely, everything is broadly destroyed, and the Israelis are falling into these ambushes, including a few hours ago, there was another ambush. We don't know yet the numbers of dead. The Israelis called it like a security incident in the north of Gaza. But it's probably like the ones that was reported yesterday and the day before. At least, 5 to 10 Israeli soldiers are dead in those attacks.
Yeah, there have been reports for months and months, arguably for over a half a year, Laith, about the Israeli regime's military and its status, how the reservists, who are just settlers who want to make money and work and settle and live on Palestinian territory, they are sent to essentially kill, maim, and then, of course, go into what is rubble guerrilla urban warfare. Like this is creating huge problems for the Israeli military. Laith, talk about this, because you have Israel at the same time saying they are going to expand the war. They're lying. They're saying they're bombing Yemen, but it's the U.S. and the U.K. who's bombing Yemen. But they say they're going to bomb Yemen. They're going to destroy the Ansar Allah movement. Then they say they're going to bomb Iran. They're going to bomb the nuclear sites. But yet Hamas is resurging. How do you square this circle, Laith, in the context of what's going on right now with the ceasefire? Because there's a lot of chest thumping, a lot of killing, but also it seems like a lot of trouble.
Yeah, I mean, look, the Israeli military has been defeated resoundingly since October 7th. They lost their top generals and their top units on October 7th. And since then, although we may think that it's only the Israelis that are fighting on the ground inside Gaza and or in Lebanon, the reality is much further than that. The reality is that the United States and all of the NATO or Zionist Empire components have been directly involved in the war, even on the ground with special forces, as well as thousands upon thousands of mercenaries. And so while we hear, let's say, the Israelis admitting 5 or 10, let's say, dead yesterday in one of these ambushes, the resistance always says the number is at least 3 times that. And maybe the Israelis are telling half the truth. They're hiding some of their dead, but they're also not reporting any of the mercenaries and or special forces from the alliance behind them that are also being liquidated in these battles. So the Israelis have lost the battle in the air against Hezbollah. They lost the battle in the air and in the sea against Yemen and against Iran. And the United States and the whole Zionist Empire government from Washington, D.C., has been fighting this war fully. It's not only bombarding Yemen, it's the bombardment of Lebanon. Israel didn't have enough jets to do the damage that it did, or to conduct 6,000 air raids in one day. Israel has just a few hundred aircrafts. Of course, the American and British and French and Italian and Saudi and others air forces were also involved in the bombardment of Lebanon. Similarly, the attacks on Syria after the fall of the Assad government, those were not conducted by Israel alone. And so I think the Zionists are having a crisis moment, a mental crisis moment, because on the one hand, they tell the whole world that they are the chosen people. And they tell themselves that, and they tell their children that, and they say they are basically the best thing since sliced bread, okay? This is what they believe of themselves, and they are the best fighters and the best intelligence and the best doctors and the best lawyers and the best actors, and everybody else doesn't have anything, okay? All the Nobel Prizes should go to them. And suddenly they're faced with a reality where a barefoot fighter in Gaza can take out a whole battalion of them. And the Yemeni resistance, thousands of kilometers away, can target their most important sites in minutes. So they're having this psychosis moment, and you can see it playing out in the social media, and how it's playing out on the ground is that these psychotic Zionists that are being defeated when they're face to face with the Palestinian resistance or the Lebanese resistance are taking it out on civilians. They're just throwing bullets and grenades at random targets and feeling returning their manhood somehow that way.
Yeah. This feels like Israel's Vietnam moment in many respects, because as we're talking about this, Israel is actually attempting to expand the conflict, get deeper and deeper into war. And I want your thoughts on this. Norman Finkelstein, I have a lot of respect for Norman Finkelstein, but he makes the argument that this isn't a war. He said it's simply a genocide. In my estimation, it is both. You have Israel committing a genocide, not out of a position of strength, in my estimation, but as a way to get its way without having to do what a lot of empires have had to do in the past, which is build up a stable, if not exploitative and still violent system. Israel cannot do that. Israel cannot defeat Hamas. They've already shown they can't defeat Hamas or the Palestinian resistance as a whole, let alone everyone else that they are trying to expand into, this greater Israel, which I think is a farce. I think it cannot actually exist. Your thoughts?
Yeah, look, sometimes Norman Finkelstein and other commentators in the West, because they're not on the ground here and seeing facts, and they don't understand Palestinian or Arabic culture in general, they make these mistakes of overstating the power of Zionism and empire and underestimating the indigenous. Okay, we saw that a few weeks ago also after the fall of Syria, how some commentators were saying, oh, we give up on the Arabic people. I don't, and it's really hugely problematic, because for the last 80 years, since the end of World War II, there hasn't been a people that given more sacrifices in the fight against colonialism and imperialism than the Arabic people as a whole. Millions of people in Algeria, in Libya, in Egypt, in Syria, in Iraq, in Palestine, in Lebanon, in Yemen, died in the battle against imperialism and colonialism and didn't give up yet. There's no other nation on this planet that gave this sacrifice, while at the same time the Western populace, what we would call sometimes white, and I don't like this label, and the Jewish European populace have given zero sacrifices against colonialism and imperialism. Mr. Norman Finkelstein is one of those examples of people that call themselves anti-Zionist Jews, that the best that I can expect from them as a Palestinian is to talk something supportive of my liberation. But I can never depend on any Jewish European, Jewish North American to ever sacrifice anything to carry arms against Zionism, like the Germans carried arms against the Nazis, or like white Americans carried arms with John Brown against slavery. Okay, up until now, 80 years, not one Jewish European carried arms against Zionism. So it's fine for me when Norman Finkelstein or other Jewish Westerner commentators stand beside the Palestinians and support our struggle. But I am not fine when they cross the line and they think that they can tell the Palestinians how to liberate themselves and or belittle us to a humanitarian issue. I don't need Finkelstein's pity and or any Jewish Europeans' pity. I need them to man up, to actually act in rebellious ways, not just talk. Talk is cheap. Let's see one Jewish European or one North American die for the liberation of Palestine.
Yeah, well, it always certainly raises my eyebrows when I see a negation of the resistance. I think that is a huge mistake because, on the one hand, yes, Israel has decimated Gaza, but at the same time, the numbers do not lie. And it's not even just numbers, it's also we see it. They're recording it for us. The resistance is recording. They're telling us that they are fighting the Israeli regime, and they're doing it quite effectively. They, despite the technological prowess we see in the differences, we see that the resistance has grown, and that the Israeli regime, the military, while it has the capacity to murder, it doesn't have the capacity to defeat any one of its so-called adversaries that stand in its way toward a greater Israel. Your assessment, Laith?
Yeah, and they would have been defeated October 8th if the whole collective empire didn't come to save them. They would have ran out of weapons long time ago. They would have packed up and ran back to Europe and North America, these colonists, if the West didn't save them. While the Palestinians and the Lebanese, who did they have behind them other than Iran? There's nobody else. And Iran that is sanctioned and besieged. I mean, look at the huge disparity between power and finances and weapons, and we're still at a standstill. So if only one component of the empire ceased supporting the Zionist colony, it would have collapsed. For instance, if Turkey, out of this imperialist domain, decided to stop the shipments of food and gas and oil to Israel, Israel would have collapsed within a month. If the Saudis and the Emiratis and the Jordanians didn't build a substitute supply route to the Sinai Canal, Israel would have collapsed. This is not talking about even the deliveries of weapons or anything. Without that, it would have collapsed. So the odds were huge. The odds are like 1,000,000 to 1 almost. And we're still at a standstill and drawing them into a draw, basically. This is unprecedented, I think, in terms of the odds and the successes, even though we are very sad. The genocide, we're sad. I am, as a Syrian, heartbroken that I've lost my homeland to the packs of wolves of the Wahhabi death squads that the United States controls.
Yeah. I mean, it's the odds were certainly grim when you look at it from the surface, but then when you see what has transpired, while there's been death, there's been destruction, there's also been just a reaffirmation of how you are having the ruling establishment of the empire itself talk about a war of attrition. When I hear the words war of attrition, I don't generally think, oh, a resistance war versus a resistance, like anti-colonial resistance versus the most powerful military forces that have ever existed in human history. Generally don't think about that if you look at it from the outside, but that is exactly what is happening. Laith, I wanted to now get your comments on more deeply on the way that Ansar Allah has stepped up, because we've seen the reports. Israel, the United States, they all have said, well, everyone has been defeated. Hezbollah, Iran, Hamas. Now we're sitting pretty. And then Syria. After that, Ansar Allah went on an incredible offensive, and it's still going on, to the point where they've hit the Ministry of Defense in Israel. They're causing pandemonium and panic all across central occupied Palestinian territory, Tel Aviv, these places. And there seems to be no end in sight. They're demonstrating this hypersonic Palestine 2 missile like they have huge stockpiles of them. They're using it seemingly every other day. Talk about the significance of this from the standpoint of the resistance, as well as what we've been talking about, which is the reality of the Zionist, the Israeli regime's current situation.
Yeah, I mean, look, Yemen had developed this hypersonic missile through its own engineers and are building it completely indigenous in the country. This is a huge achievement for any nation on this planet. Yemen basically is in a club of only 5 countries that have hypersonic missiles, and the United States is not one of them. So this is a huge achievement. The attack that they conducted an hour ago, or just a little bit over an hour, included hypersonic missiles, cruise missiles, and drones, and they hit the Tel Aviv region, and they hit the power plant in the south of occupied Palestine around the Eilat Rashrash resort on the Gulf of Aqaba. So this is the third power plant that the Yemenis hit in the Zionist colony in the last week. And this is all in retaliation, of course, for the Zionist and tripath Israeli, American, UK attack on the power plants of Yemen and their ports. And I think by Yemen doing this is setting a standard that maybe the rest of the axis of resistance should have followed from the beginning, that the major power plants and major infrastructure of the Zionist colony that maintains the regular life of these colonists in luxury should have been targeted from the beginning. Even if the axis of resistance doesn't want to target civilians as the Zionists and the West do in these huge massacres in Iraq, in Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, and Palestine. But at least they should have targeted these infrastructure. And now Yemen is delivering on this. Yemen is also targeted over the last week 3 times the Harry Truman aircraft carrier group. And each time the aircraft carrier group had to rush back up the Red Sea further and further away from Yemeni territory to avoid the hitting. And the last attack was actually during jets trying to take off from the Harry Truman, and that put all the jets on the top of the deck and also the ones that are trying to take off into huge risk. We don't know what's the result because the Americans hide that. So, and finally, Yemen is now threatening both the Saudis because some jets took off from airfields inside Saudi during that tripath attack on Yemen. And they are also warning Turkey that they will be targeting Turkish shipping lanes in the Indian Ocean, in the Red Sea, in the Arabian Sea, as a punishment for Turkey continuing to supply the Zionist colony. This is amazing, amazing work, and I think many nations can follow path of the Yemenis. Imagine if there's 3-4 Yemens across the world, a couple in Africa and a couple of Latin America, it'll be the end of imperialism.
This is 100% true, Laith, because the hypersonic 2, the Palestine 2 hypersonic missile, what it's demonstrating is that it can get to occupied Palestinian territory, Israel, the city of Tel Aviv, for example, about 2,000 kilometers away from the Yemeni capital. That missile gets there in 11 minutes. So they can hit anybody they want in a very short amount of time. So my question to you, Laith, is has Yemen, has Ansarallah, have they become the strongest member of the resistance at the moment, in the sense that they before the Gaza genocide, they were in the most dire of circumstances in terms of the what the U.S. Saudi Israeli, everyone in that region backing the war there, which caused one of the gravest humanitarian catastrophes in the world. Yet they're doing this. They are fighting. They are not only fighting back, they are sticking by what, without any kind of regard to rules and norms that are imposed upon them by the empire. What do you have to say about this?
So Yemen is the best example of the power of geography, topography, and demography. Okay, so the difference between Yemen and, let's say, Lebanon is how far away Yemen is from the Zionist colony. So it's hard for the Israelis to utilize their only winning card, which is their air force. Secondly, the geography and topography of Yemen means that it's huge mountains, the highest mountains in Arabia and Africa. And they are, there's so many valleys and crevices and so on. It's impossible to monitor even from satellites. And this is why the US was throwing so many MQ-9 drones on Yemen, because they have to go very close to the crevices between these mountains to try to even monitor anything. And that's how they were being shot down because of that. And finally, the demography of Yemen, it's 90% Shia, and 90% of the population lives in the areas that the Ansarullah government rules in the north. And therefore, there is, cohesion within the population and state, at least the areas that the government controls. And so those things, none of the other members of the Axis of Resistance had. Lebanon, and plus, by the way, it's like almost 30 million, the population of Yemen. So Lebanon sure has a few mountains, but it's stuck on the border with a Zionist colony. It's not like shooting a hypersonic missile from Lebanon on the Zionist colony. It doesn't make sense. It'll be there like in half a second or something. And so, plus also the demography of Lebanon means there's so many different sects and so many interests in control of those sects and so on. There's no cohesion in the population. It's bordered by Syria. Similarly, Syria, it doesn't have much of geography in terms of where it can hide its equipment and so on, other than the mountains on the coast. And there's all those ethnic and so forth divisions that were played against it. So look at how the difference between the war that Yemen conducted against the rest of the coalition led by the Saudis and Emiratis over 10 years versus how it conducted its war against the Zionist colony now in the Aqsa flood. And you can see what I mean by demography, topography, and geography that are something. So when the battle with its neighbors was happening, and it included land formations, yes, geography played a huge part because of those mountains that helped Yemen defeat the invading forces, but it didn't need to use hypersonic missiles. And even though that the bases of the Saudis and others are closer, the air bases, it didn't make a difference, the Air Force of the West conducting attacks because of the geography. So this is why Yemen is different from the rest of the Axis of Resistance. And one last thing I would say is that Yemen right now is setting an example of how a small nation can become an international player just by taking a just position on an issue like Palestine that everybody else is shrinking from. So you can be an international powerhouse and a balancer of international politics if you step in on the right of justice, even if you are as small as Yemen.
Yeah, very well said. That's 100% true. And I wanted your response to something I hear a lot, Laith, in the context of, let's say, both Ansar Allah and the rest of the resistance, whether it's Hezbollah, whether it's Hamas, the Palestinian resistance as a whole, even Iran, the sovereign big country that is as you said, the single nation state supporter. As Yemen, yes, but Yemen has its own government issues as it does its very just resistance. So the question is, Laith, the Israeli regime is committing all of these massacres. The Israeli regime still, and after the Gaza ceasefire, during the Lebanon ceasefire, still committing these massacres, still killing civilians. There's a report that it has made up somewhere 80-90% of all global civilian deaths in the year of 2024, Israel and its actions. How can we say then that the resistance is in fact having such an impact? For example, like Ansar Allah's strikes, they're hitting, they're causing panic, they're having an impact. The Red Sea blockade, yes, but how is it then that we can say this, with all this killing, that there is progress and movement and strength in the resistance?
So I think the best example we can take is what happened in Vietnam and or Algeria. Remember the liberation of Vietnam, it cost 6 million lives in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. That didn't mean the United States won if it killed 6 million people. It lost the war. Similarly, in Algeria, it was around 6 million Algerian people massacred over the 100-year occupation of the French, 2 million of them in the last few years of the revolution. That doesn't mean the French won. The French lost. And we are right now in this moment that the minute there is this quote-unquote ceasefire, and we don't know how it's going to play out, the isolation of the Zionist colony and Zionism as a whole across the human family is going to accelerate. Already, people all across the world look at Israel as a pariah, and people are pursuing Israeli soldiers and Israeli generals anytime they land anywhere from Sri Lanka to Brazil to Italy. And this is not going to stop. It's going to actually, the minute there is no fighting on the ground, that work will accelerate. People will have more attention, time, and to pursue bringing these Zionists to justice across the world. And this means that there will be a self-imposed blockade by the Zionists themselves. They will stop going anywhere because they'll be too scared of getting arrested or anything like that. And the people cut all their business with the Zionist colony, much of the nations on this planet. And that means the Zionist colony will depend even more so on the handouts of the West and business with the West. And who knows what's happening inside Western states. Populations are restless. They want also to be part of this campaign to bring to justice the Zionist war criminals. So the future is already written. The end of the Zionist colony, there's nothing that can stop that from happening. What the Zionist colony can do and what the West as a whole, as a Zionist empire can do, is maximize the number of deaths, the civilian deaths, the destruction of civilian life and infrastructure in the region here. But in the end, that will not save off the collapse of the Zionist colony. And that's, I think, what the West is trying to do. They know it's the end of the Zionist colony, but they are trying to take as much of the population and the wealth of this region with them as the Zionist colony collapses.
Yeah, and imagine, Laith, Israel has been saying that they're going to continue to expand. They're going to go. They've gone into Syria. They rolled into relatively sparsely populated areas of Syria, thumped their chest, and then they've been talking about why is it they have to rely on hasbara? These lies about Yemen, for example. We know that it's the U.S. and the U.K. that's bombing Yemen. but they're saying it's them. They're doing it. They're the ones who are showing off strength. Why is it then? And the same goes with Hamas and the Palestinian resistance, and and the rest. They keep saying we've done this. They did it with Iran. They said we took out the nuclear sites. I mean, we took out the air defense systems, and then the Great Prophet exercise. Iran is rolling out anti-ballistic missile systems and air defenses like nothing was hit. So why is it then that Israel has to rely on hasbara to look strong if it is in fact in this incredibly dominant position?
Yeah, that's the psychosis setting in. They lied so much that they believe their own lie, number one. Number two is that they can't, they'll have like a Matrix Fritz, situation. If they, say one truthful thing, the whole thing collapses. The copium that all these Zionists are inhaling on a daily basis, I mean, these posts that you see on social media by Zionists, they're so disassociated from reality. But what can you do? I mean, they've raised their children in these Zionist schools, telling them that they are above others. And the Western media, the mainstream media, for decades now almost, have been telling us that that even Christian white people are below them. I mean, look, I've never seen this in human history before. Every nation at some point thought of itself as better than everybody else, and or looked at one of its neighbors as less than. But I've never seen a whole civilization line up like the Western civilization today does and say, we are less than the chosen people. When did anybody do this in human history? And the mainstream media is telling us that every day. And so this is now, the reality is collapsing. These mythologies that the whole Western populace has been weaned on. And this is why I think even the strategists within the imperial domain that have been, that had believed and swallowed this whole lie themselves also are having problems putting forward tactics and strategies for the leaders of their countries to actually deliver on something that is not fictional, because of how their own background of knowledge is all based on this fiction of supremacy of the chosen people.
And maybe your last comment on Yemen, as you were talking, it made me think about the United States. It is the empire of exceptionalism. American exceptionalism is the most dominant, or has been at least for a long time before it essentially lost its legitimacy not too long ago. It was the king maker of ideas, right? America is the best, number one. It's the empire. But we've seen the U.S. empire literally give everything to Israel. And I don't believe it's because Israel controls the United States' empire, but it's because the United States needs so badly Israel to succeed in what it does that it's willing to give anything to it for that to happen, which then strengthens Israeli exceptionalism, Zionist exceptionalism to this degree. But then we have your last comment on Yemen. We have the poorest country, one of the poorest countries in the world, decimated, sanctioned. Everything was destroyed from 2014 onward in that war. They produced a hypersonic missile before the United States, the Yemeni armed forces, a movement, Ansar Allah, that is the legitimate army of Yemen, but is not recognized as such. They produced a hypersonic. I mean, this just blows everything that anyone would assume to be true about the state of the world if you just take that fact. Your final reaction?
Yes, and I don't think obviously that Zionists control the West. Or at least Jewish Zionists. There's no Jewish control of media and whatever, blah blah blah. But truthfully, I over the last year have began changing my mind about this idea that is it Israel that controls the US, or is it US that controls Israel, to come to the synthesis that we have right now a Zionist empire, and the secular Zionists, Christian Zionists, Muslim Zionists, Black Zionists, white Zionists, they're all agree on this premise. And, the religion right now, the official religion of much of the West is Zionism. You can desecrate any prophet, any holy book you want, any religion, but you cannot criticize the state of Israel, a colony, and or the political ideology behind them. So we are, there is a Zionist colony. Israel is just a component of it. It has nothing to do with religion. It's just Zionism now has been made to represent the epitome of white supremacy. It's kind of bringing the nostalgia within the secular supremacist in the West to Nazi days, and the Christian supremacists to the KKK. It's giving a boost to this idea of American exceptionalism that is now being supplemented by this idea of Zionist exceptionalism. And anyone that wants to lead in the West has to show their credentials with Zionism in order to be given that space to rule.
Yeah, and from the United States side, I definitely view it similarly to you, where it's no longer, we shouldn't be having this debate about the United States, the tail wagging the dog. Is it the US? Is it Israel? It's the same empire. It's the same empire. They are wagging each other. They are working together. They view, and this is why it's been so, I think, important to cover the resistance in a broad spectrum, because when you do that, you see that the United States has a really vested, even when we say, oh, the United States has no interest. A lot of people say that. Why are they doing this for Israel? No, actually, the United States wants dominance in the region. It can't do that without Israel. Israel knows this. And so Israel demands what it wants. The United States generally gives it. But Laith, first, I want to just direct people, because we are at peak viewership, to make sure they go to palestine.video, the link below, to check out your work, and also all the ways to support this channel. Keep hitting the like button, and also submit questions. We might have some time at the end here to answer them. So submit some questions to Laith. Do that by super chat. If you don't, and we don't have any super chat questions, just make them bold so I can see them in the chat. But I had one final topic to cover with you, Laith, and that's more of an overall assessment, including the situation with Iran, because we know that the United States is going to be dealing with Iran, if we want to put it in those terms, in this next administration. We've heard everything from nuclear deal to war. Israel has said the same thing. We've heard everything from they're going to bomb any day now, to we're going to wait for the United States to handle the situation, and then we'll neutralize Iran. But Iran held these massive military exercises that are ongoing, the Great Prophet exercises. There's been a lot of talk about Iran being weakened, but the overall situation with the resistance, it seems, is this ceasefire in Lebanon is about to end. There's one about to begin, although we know in Gaza, but we know that Israel does not listen to ceasefires. Give your take on the overall state of the axis of resistance, including Iran. How do you feel like things are going to go into 2025, as we have Hezbollah waiting in the wings to re-engage if necessary, political changes in Lebanon, Syria, and of course Iran being the big ticket that the United States and Israel would love to topple?
Yeah, so the ceasefire in Gaza should probably come into effect pretty late tonight. Last time the ceasefire in Lebanon was called around 3:30 in the morning. And in the last hours of before the ceasefire was called in Lebanon, there was a a rampage by the Zionists attacking civilian infrastructure and killing civilians. And so we should expect that also in Gaza. There's already withdrawals happening from the Netzarim axis in the center of Gaza. By the way, in Lebanon today, the Israelis invaded four different villages that the Lebanese military was preparing to enter over the last 5 days. And the Israeli soldiers were filmed using their personal guns and hand grenades, throwing them into homes as they're walking around just for the hell of it. They booby-trapped a few villas in these villages and blew them up, again, just for the hell of it. And the ceasefire in Lebanon deal and the complete withdrawal of the Israeli military is supposed to end by the 27th of September, so 7 days after the coming of Emperor Trump into office. If the ceasefire happens in Gaza, it's supposed to take 45 days from tomorrow, so it'll be end of February when this complete withdrawal of the Israelis is supposed to conclude this deal. Those are all dates in the future, and I think the coming of Trump is going to really decide if these ceasefires are for real or is it just a ploy. In Syria, the situation is really bad for the tools of the West. HTS cannot really hold the whole country with 50,000 fighters. They can't fill the ministries and the police forces and the hospitals and the universities and whatever with these mercenaries. So the country is not really under their control. We heard Lavrov today say that there is a push by the Saudis and the Gulf countries to have Iran and Russia be involved in the shaping of the new government in Syria and the reconstruction of the country. So things are not going as the West expects them. They may have bitten more than they can chew in Syria. And in Iran, we heard two things today that are a little bit contradictory. And, this is something that indicates how unpredictable the situation is that we're moving into now with the coming of Trump. One is that the Troika in Europe, the Germans, the French, and the British, are having secret talks with Iran about their nuclear, programs. And at the same time, we're, seeing all these exercises by the Iranian forces and displays of weapons and promises to have Truthful Promise 3 happen. So the messaging is not clear. It's all going to depend on how Emperor Trump comes in. Is he going to come in guns blazing? Is he really more interested in occupying Canada, Greenland, and Panama than defeating the Axis of Resistance? I wish so. I mean, I'm a Canadian citizen, but I'd rather that we stop being a theatrical vessel and just be part of the U.S.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting about this is what you're saying, Laith, seems to be that the United States empire is actually outstretched, because you said, hey, is it Trump going to do this, or is he going to do that? Is he going to focus on West Asia, or is he going to focus on what seems to be an internecine, old school, West on West competition, which we haven't had arguably since the end of World War II, when the United States became the hegemon? Or will it focus on West Asia? And then you also have Ukraine. So the United States empire is outstretched, but I think Israel is a microcosm of this. Israel is following the U.S. model in a lot of ways, but there's this geography and topography and history that's different. Israel is a settler colony. I mean, the United States is definitely a settler colony, but the United States has a geographic position that's far different. Israel has to stretch out if it's going to expand in a much different way. And it seems like it is utterly failing in this, and that people who believe that Greater Israel was just going to come because Syria fell, I think we're making a miscalculation, because Syria doesn't seem like it's going to be governable. And then, of course, you have Iran. While there's all these contradictions, Iran has just shown that, well, perhaps if it is provoked, if there is a day where Israel is trying to step on, trying to walk onto its doorstep, that Iran would be ready for that.
Oh yes, and I think we are, seeing even inside Iran some, because of the new president and the foreign affairs minister are more conciliatory with the West. This is also, becoming. There's now a very loud opposition inside the parliament in Iran about the strategies that the new government is taking. If Trump actually doesn't broker a deal and end these wars in the West Asia, the government that we see right now in Iran is not going to last long, and there will be a return to the more radical, confrontational governments. And, I think Iran has learned a lot of lessons from the last year and a half. Most of the axis of resistance have learned new lessons. And the number one lesson is that we live right now in the jungle. There is no more anything called international law. There is no such thing as human rights. And all the rules of engagement in wars and forbidden acts in wars have been lifted. You can outright genocide. You can outright send your ambassador into a parliament like that, like Lebanon, and appoint a new president as a colonial power. You can outright occupy land and annex land, as happened in Syria by the Turks and the Israelis and so forth. So anyone within the axis of resistance that was trying to portray themselves or position the axis of resistance as a counter to the way that the West conducts itself by respecting international law or respecting human rights or respecting the rules of war, is now finding themselves feeling foolish because of how the enemy conducted themselves in this war, and was able to score all these points, not because of how great they are, the Zionists or the American empire, Zionist empire as a whole, but because of the restraint of the axis of resistance. They put on themselves restraints that put us in this situation, and I don't think this is going to be repeated again as a mistake.
Yeah, and I wanted to now talk to you about, I don't see many questions here, so let's do one final. This just came to me because we cover here a lot, Laith, geopolitics in the realm of military, great power competition, multipolarity, all of this. But we need to talk about the economic reality, not only that the U.S. empire finds itself in, but also we can zoom in on the Israeli situation. I think is very instructive. We talked about Yemen's Red Sea blockade, its continued strikes onto Israel. We've also talked about Israel's military being exhausted, and a big reason for that is economic reasons, because these are settler reservists who want to be working and making money. They can't make money anymore because they're in a war of attrition, Wall Street Journal calls it, in Gaza, let alone the fact that the Netanyahu regime and Smotrich and these folks and the entire Zionist regime, they want to expand further. They want to take these guys in further into Syria. They want to take them maybe against Turkey, maybe against Iran. They want to take them maybe against Egypt. Talk about the economic reality, though, of the Israeli regime. What does it tell us about not just the Israeli regime, but the overall world order? Because it seems to me this is a microcosm of a general reality that empire finds itself in.
Yeah, I mean, look, the Zionist colony was always special within this economic system of the empire, because much of its industry was forced. These big corporations like Microsoft and others didn't open factories in Israel because they thought, there's so many amazing workers in Israel, or that it's a stable situation. No, they were ordered by the Imperial masters to open these factories there in order to provide jobs for these Zionists. Otherwise, it's cheaper for Microsoft to open anywhere in the Arabic world some factory, and would have gotten more skilled labor to hire, and a bigger market, and a cheaper overhead costs. So similarly, right now, what we see is that because of the collapse of this fabricated economy, now the economy is even 100% dependent on direct donations, basically, by the Zionist lobbies and the Zionist governments in the West. It cannot sustain itself. This is above and beyond the nonstop supply of weapons, all at the cost of the empire, that is sustaining the firing power of the Zionist colony. So looking at that, there's at least 10,000 medium and small companies that shut down in the Zionist colony. There's, according to the lowest estimates, 500,000 Zionists that already have left, either ones that had dual citizenship or high degrees that they could find jobs anywhere in the West. Canada, for instance, gave 10,000, according to numbers from mid-2024. So we're like, 8 months down the road from that, was 10,000 Israelis were given permanent residency in Israel within the first year of the Aqsa flood. You could extrapolate from that how many are in the US or Europe or Australia. There's probably, the numbers are in the hundreds of thousands. And I think one thing that we should notice here to understand the economic things at play here is that the most important social contract between a colony and the citizens that it has as a colony is that the promise that the colonists can run wild, rape and kill and pillage and enrich themselves through rape, killing, and pillaging. Okay, and the minute that social contract starts collapsing, the whole project collapses. So we can look at what happened in France. People think that the French Revolution was because the French people were mad at the king and the cake of Marie Antoinette. Yeah. But in reality, the French Revolution happened because the colonial social contract started collapsing. France lost Quebec. France began losing Haiti. So the French working class that had the ability to go anywhere in the Americas and kill and pillage and rape and enrich themselves suddenly didn't have an out for that, and therefore the French Revolution happened. Okay, and that's the moment that right now the Zionist colony finds itself. And this is why the freaks in Brooklyn and others that are Zionists are also now going crazy and becoming more violent, even in the streets of New York, because they have a promise all their life. They've been told they can go and hunt any Arab they want to in the wild, wild West Bank, and now they can't.
Yeah, and that is just, I think, is so well said, because I think it underscores the significance of the fact that you have, let's say, Yemen, Ansar Allah, Hezbollah, Iran, all throughout the year of 2024 into 2025 conducted operations which didn't kill a lot of people. It didn't target settlers. It wasn't retribution. It wasn't one-to-one, hey, we're going to take your life. But what it's done, it has subtly, without a lot of people noticing this, especially in the West, eaten away at that contract as well. Because what you need, number one, to be able to exploit and take advantage of an occupation is safety, is the ability to have utter dominance over those from which you are stealing from. That is eroding ever so rapidly. And I believe that's what is so significant. Not just what the blockade is very significant by Ansarallah, obviously targeting aircraft carriers, firing ballistic missiles, drones into the Red Sea, keeping ships from going. But it's also when they strike Israel, when Hezbollah has struck Israel, when Iran has struck Israel, what happens to the settlers? They go into panic. They injure themselves. The missiles aren't even coming for them, but they're injuring themselves because they are so afraid of what it means to have that reality of being able to just take without any consequences crumble. Your thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, look at the you mentioned the stampedes yesterday. During the Yemeni hypersonic attack on Tel Aviv, there was a stampede and 12 people injured themselves. They don't tell us how badly, but this is a reoccurring thing. And here in Lebanon or in Palestine or other places, when the bombs are falling, because this is our land, we know that we're going to die on it anyways. People are not in this panic, moment, and I think this deterioration of the self-image that the Zionists have of their superiority is going to accelerate. And if Trump today doesn't rejuvenate the Zionist colony during his tenure in the next 4 years, it's going to be really a bad day for them, and it's just going to accelerate. And especially if he, as an emperor, decides that he wants to do Fortress North America, kind of a return to control of the Western Hemisphere, a Monroe Doctrine, but also looking at his white neighbors in the north, not only his brown neighbors in the south. That's going to spell the end of the Zionist colony, especially if Trump gets busy whacking Mexico and the Mexican cartels and throwing refugees out into Mexico. And it's going to be a war basically on the border of the United States that hasn't happened since the Canadian American wars in the 1870s. So the Zionists must be really worried that the attention is going to go away from them. Even if they are part of the empire and love Trump, they would rather that he continues wars here. And looking at how Trump says that he's going to be meeting with Putin as fast as possible, and clearly the deal will include Russia keeping the territories that it captured in Ukraine. It seems that the United States is finding a balance with the other two superpowers, China and Russia, at least, about the idea that everybody can have a protective zone, that everybody should be comfortable with their surroundings. And therefore, maybe North Korea will not be harassed anymore, or Trump will back down from the situation in Taiwan. In return, the Russians and the Chinese will just stay out of it as Trump buckles down on all of North America and Central America.
Well, it's obvious. One thing that you've pointed out, Laith, is that the Trump administration, as the emperor of the U.S. empire, to not be redundant with it, is in fact needing to make choices. Right? The United States empire can't do it all. It meets the definition of outstretched, and it's already shown that it has to back away at some point from Ukraine. It is China just released a $1 trillion a number of the trade surplus. Certainly nothing that the U.S. has done against China economically has worked, and militarily, forget about it. Both of those questions are nuclear war questions. And then, of course, West Asia is a quagmire that Donald Trump has to make a decision about. And I wanted to ask you about this. Historically, can you help us understand the precedence of a possibility of a U.S. president finally pulling on that Israeli leash? Because I know there's the example of Lebanon during the Reagan administration, where Israel was getting very trigger happy, maiming civilians, moving into Lebanese villages. And Ronald Reagan picked up the phone and said, "You got to stop this now because it's not making us look good. I can't deal with this." It wasn't, "Oh, we feel bad for the Lebanese people." It wasn't, "Oh, we don't want you to do your thing, expand." It was, "This is not going well for us. We need you to stop at the moment." Is there any precedence here beyond that, though, Laith,
There is.
regarding the Palestine situation? I want you to talk about that.
Yeah, there is another precedent, which is the 1956 war, the tripat attack by the Zionist colony, the French and the British, on Egypt of Jamal Abdel Nasser and their occupation of the Suez Canal. That triggered a nasty response from the Americans, who openly ordered the French and the British to withdraw and left the Israelis to fend for themselves against the Egyptian military, which eventually retrieved, the Suez Canal. So that was a moment where the United States needed to assert that it's the only hegemon at the end of World War II, and to make sure that the French, the English, and the Israelis, who thought of themselves as new, strong powers, to remind them who they are. And so today, maybe Trump would want to remind the Israelis what's the real size of a 7 million settler population, with like a small country colony that acts up as if it's like a world power. That doesn't relate to reality. So Trump may follow that example, and that I would say, look, the United States right now is trying to learn lessons from its mistakes in the Cold War and the battle against the anti-colonialist movements in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. Originally there was the Third World Movement and a non-aligned movement that was led by Egypt, Indonesia, India, Yugoslavia, and China joined that. And the Soviet Union fought that third way, non-aligned movement. And when the non-aligned movement basically collapsed with the death of most of these leaders, like in Egypt and Sukarno in Indonesia being killed and so forth, China found that the non-aligned movement is not going to work out, so it started getting closer to the Soviet Union. And Nixon, at that point, with Kissinger, played this game of opening the Western markets to China to try to sway it away from full integration with the Soviet Union. Now, today, that meant that 30 years of peace with China lifted itself from poverty and became the number one economic power on the globe. And the United States, if it wants to play that same game again, it has to think of itself. Can it have a 30-year peace period where it's not involved in war, that it can shore up its economy, redirect its resources, uplift its population to compete with China? And on the other hand, the issue of the military power, we see right now with the example of Yemen that the United States have lost all its naval projection ability, power to project its will on people across the planet through its navy. So it's logical that it retreats to its landmass and try to project power through land on its neighbors, okay? And that will be what Russia has taken as a path. So you see, it's trying, in a way, Trump is trying to hybrid what the Chinese did over the last 30 years with what the Russians did over the last 30 years to try to uplift their economy and military once more. And I don't know if he's gonna be successful, but that's the direction he's taking the country.
Which is interesting because, yeah, when you think about the United States, so much different than China and Russia, right? These are powers that never really did use their economic and military systems to expand, while the United States, of course, has this long history of doing so. So pulling that back seems to me to be not just a not just a huge change, but a significant defeat. And when I think about what you were saying about Israel and the United States, we put them together. Should there be any pivot away from West Asia in 2025 or even beyond that under this Trump administration, it will be a huge victory for the resistance and for the multipolar world, because that means that the central focal point of why the resistance and why the aggression is so fierce right now is the genocide in Gaza and the project of Greater Israel. When that crumbles, when the United States says, well, we got to move somewhere else now, and we can't invest so many because we can't do it all, that will be a huge victory. And it seems to me that that's closer, if whether it's Trump or not, whatever, it's not to be like, hey, Trump, you're doing a good job. No, that you just said it. It's about maneuvering the empire somewhere else. But it would be a big victory for the resistance in the multipolar world. What do you think?
Yes, I mean, look, the empire is overburdened with all these wars that it started, that are ongoing and never ending. And there's too many local vessels that are pulling the boat down with them. And the biggest weight is not Ukraine, really, it's this Zionist colony. And, the US has to let go of some of this dead weight pulling the whole boat down. So they will have to choose. And, I'm not sure, honestly, where things are going to go. I'm throwing out all these ideas, but we live in this right now twilight zone, upside down world. Everything is unpredictable. The actors are all, at least in the imperial order, are irrational. There's no way I can calculate what Netanyahu and or Trump think in their head. And there's so much contradictions between each statement that comes from Trump or Netanyahu or any Western leader at these days. One day it's one thing, the other day it's the other. So it's really hard to predict. But I as the Chinese curse would say, may you live in interesting times. And we are living right now the most interesting times, definitely the most dangerous times, and it's very hard to predict. I think that if the United States withdraws to its geographic borders and projects on to Latin America and North America as a whole, it will have a better chance to maintain itself as one of the superpowers in the world. If it continues to overstretch itself like this, it will collapse in a nasty way. And I think the biggest weakness right now to the United States as an empire is not only this overstretch, it's the collapse of the internal cohesion of the populace. They're cannibalizing each other right now to blame on who's responsible for the fires in LA. And I mean, can you imagine the Lebanese people in the midst of the war and 1 million refugees starting to cannibalize each other, blaming each other instead of helping each other? What would have happened? This is a nation,
there was an earthquake in Xizang, the what's called Tibet, and it was massive, and it killed like 30 plus people. It was devastating to people who live mainly in villages and rural areas. Imagine if China was saying, who's to blame? Is it this Communist Party official? Is it Xi Jinping? Is it a local official? Is it America? Is it our neighbors over here? They did that. What would happen? Nothing good. But no, they don't do that. They come together. They say, we have a problem. We have to address it. Yeah, the United States is certainly looking for this blame game, but it feels to me, Laith, that is a byproduct of, and that gets worse the more and more that the U.S. empire gets more desperate to maintain this hegemony. And maybe your final word on this, because you've inspired me. People don't like when I talk too much, but when you were talking, the first thing that came to mind was Turkey, Syria, West Asia, what has happened since December 2024. Everybody was like, oh, this is terrible. Israel has won. Turkey has won. Now Turkey is going to take over Syria. Now Israel is going to take over Syria, and everything is going to be terrible, not just for the resistance in Palestine, but also the world. This is a big blow. Russia, China, they're all in trouble. Iran, all in trouble now. And then I thought to myself, do you know these forces that you're talking about? The United States empire is overstretched. Turkey is not an empire. Turkey is not. Turkey wants to be the Ottoman Empire again, neo-Ottomanism, whatever, but it's not. Do you know what it takes to be able to manage, to govern, to expand, to plunder, to exploit? Read history. Is Turkey in that position? Is even Israel in that position? Yeah, it's occupied Palestine. Yeah, it's the Golan Heights, and now it's expanded a little bit and it tries to move into Lebanon, but Hezbollah stops it every single time. So talk Laith about this, because this is my problem right now, is that I feel like a lot of people in the collective West have this nihilism, have this very narrow view of the world, that whenever a headline changes, whenever a domino falls, what we tend to do in the collective is we fall back on the doom and gloom because of these contradictions internally. We don't feel like we can resolve our own issues, which is really the problem. If the resistance would have won in 1956, actually, if the United States wasn't an empire, like you mentioned that war, it would have completely won. There would be Iran would not have had to, go through decades of Shah rule. We could go on and on and on if the United States had taken care of the empire already. So your last thoughts on this?
Yes. So obviously the people in the Western sphere, in the imperial domains, because they haven't been involved in any real revolutionary work since the end of World War II, they have become, eternal pundits. That's all people can do in the West. And they also, every time they see a group that is resisting the West doesn't get 100% success, they project their own impetus on those people. I mean, the odds that the Palestinian people and the axis of resistance have had to fight over the last 16 months, as I said, are unprecedented. But what is also very unprecedented is that there's not been one rebellious action in the Western domains, in the imperial domains. And that's not something that you expect in such a situation. Like even during World War I, there was the Soviet Revolution, when the people saw the czars selling their country, to join the imperial order. So where is the revolutionary Americans, Canadians, Europeans, what have you, as they're watching a genocide being committed in their name? I don't feel, yes, I was momentarily depressed when my country fell to the hands of the Wahhabi death squads. But I have learned to read a lot of history. And I've come to understand the meaning of life as this eternal struggle. You can't achieve utopia, can't achieve heaven on earth immediately. We're not gods, okay? There is a long stretch of history that we have to work generation after generation with the hopes of achieving permanent justice for everybody. And at the same time, I look at the history books and I look at what's happening to the Arabic world in this time. And it's very similar to the moment before the Crusades started or during the Crusades, when there was multiple competing Arabic rulers calling themselves the Khalif and fighting each other. And then the Crusaders came and were cannibalizing people in Idlib, the Crusaders were cannibalizing literally city after city, orgies of cannibalism. And then came the Mongol Turkic hordes and also cannibalized the people. And amongst this mass death rose Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi, Saladin as they would call him in English, and liberated and unified the Arabic people from Egypt to Yemen to Iraq and defeated the Crusaders. Okay, so hope is always on the horizon. Injustice cannot continue forever. And as long as there's people that have the will and can maintain the fire of history and teach our ways and not lose this knowledge, we can come out of the darkest moments in history. And I think there will be more sacrifices before the liberation of Palestine, but it's already written on the wall in neon lights, okay? And nobody can miss this marker. The end of the Zionist colony is coming no matter what. Just keep the faith, keep fighting, and get a backbone if you are in the West. We're all wanting, all of humanity is waiting to see those revolutionary actions in the West because all of us need to do this together.
Yeah, definitely. And in totally, Laith, it is so important that we do, Syria was taken, it was destroyed, and that is certainly depressing. When that happened, it devastated me because the regime change war a decade plus ago, I was out there with Syrian Americans, many of them Christians, Arabs, secular Arabs, who were against the regime change war in the United States. They had been living here. Actually, a lot of them had been moved away. They were professionals, almost like this brain drain. They were professionals. They couldn't stay in Syria anymore because they fear for their lives because of what these Wahhabi death squads were doing at that time. And so, there was so much work around that in those years when the Syrian army and then Russia got involved at the request of Syria to stop the regime change war, and to see it happen with no fighting, no pushback was devastating. However, that devastation for me turned into anger because I then saw people, Laith, start talking about it's all done. Everything is done. Everything is finished. Syria's, first of all, I was like, okay, yeah, this happened in Syria, but there are people there, Syrian people. The Syrian people were one of the last people to have taken from them this dream of national liberation. Like, that's one of the last ones to say, like, you're negating everybody there. You're negating the whole axis of resistance, saying everything is lost. Yes, there are setbacks, but people who are supposed to be, in for the cause of peace, suddenly saying it's all done, we're finished, and then saying Turkey is the big winner. Yeah, Turkey is the big winner now in terms of just how things look. But I went to Turkey when I was a student in 2011. Gotta say, I wasn't impressed then by how they were essentially cucked by Europe. And I wasn't impressed. I wasn't even thinking in these terms so much back then. I was just like, oh, look at this. This is interesting. Everything. They all want to be, all the leaders want to be Western. They all want to follow their European masters. They want to, they're so pro-American. This is interesting, but also disheartening. And then, you fast forward with Erdogan and all of his double dealing and knife wielding. And you think, this is the leaders, this is the government that you think is going to reshape West Asia? No, stop it. Stop. And you think the United States will let that happen? You think that they think Turkey is anything more than what it's been for years? My father was stationed in Turkey during the Vietnam War. Stationed there, sitting there, not there at the invitation of Turkey. One of the big parts of the Cuban Missile Crisis was about Turkey. Like Turkey wasn't a sovereign player then, and it still is barely a sovereign player now. Anyway, I want to give you the last word before we head out of here, because it just gets me riled up that people, especially in the West, begin to sink into this state when what really we need is to have a an analysis that pierces through that kind of lies and hasbara?
Well, Syria will rise from the ashes. It was the first country to achieve liberation from colonialism through armed struggle after World War II. In 1942, it became a sovereign before even China became a sovereign. And it was the longest sovereign and the decolonized country up until this fall. Not even any other country on this planet can claim that glory. And it will come back. It will rise from those ashes. There's too much in the history of Syria that anchors people in this understanding of who they are and their place in this world that cannot be negated. And the fact that now Turkey and the Wahhabi death squads and the Ikhwani party, Muslim Brotherhood, have control of Syria is actually going to weaken them, because they were barking about Israel and even claiming that Syria is protecting Israel, Syria of Assad is protecting Israel, and so forth, and Syria is betraying the Palestinians. Right now they have full control of Syria, and their words need to be translated into action, and their actions are opposite their words. So they're burning the propaganda that they built themselves on over the last 15 years, and that's actually going to weaken them even more, just like the occupation of South Syria is going to weaken the Israelis, not strengthen them. They're overstretched, the Israelis themselves. They have thousands of soldiers now in the south of Syria with no air defense. At any moment, a Syrian without any group or party behind them could take a sniper rifle and take out a few Israeli soldiers. It's done. So the everything that looks like a success and a victory is in reality the core of a defeat for the Turks and the Israelis and the empire as a whole.
Yeah, no, very well said. We can definitely, I think, close up there, because when you talk about Syrians doing that, like, that's going to happen. We've already seen videos of, there are former Syrian army members, there are Arab army members, and just Syrian people. That's going to happen. You think that there's going to be no resistance in Syria? You are very much mistaken. But Laith, it was great to be with you today. Everybody, be sure to hit that like button before you go. In the video description, you can find Palestine.video. You can find that link where you can support freepalestine.video. Sorry, the link is there. Be sure to click it. Donate if you can. You can find all of his incredible journalism, as well as those who are putting out their efforts and time to showcase what is actually happening in that region. And of course, you can go to the video description to find all the places to support this channel too. All right, everybody, I'll be back tomorrow night with Brian Berletic. We will go back to Ukraine and the multipolar world. Take care and good night.